Welcome to Birds.Bees.Bodies, a Planned Parenthood of Southeast and North Florida podcast where we break barriers, tear down stigmas, and promote open discussions on sexual and reproductive health. Get the buzz on topics from puberty to menopause, contraception to conception. No topic is off limits. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into a judgment-free zone to promote sexual wellness.
Welcome to another episode of Birds.Bees.Bodies brought to you by Planned Parenthood of Southeast and North Florida. And this is actually our last episode of season 1. We got through season 1 with all these amazing topics we've been through. I'm Michelle Quesada, VP of Communications for the organization and your host. And today we are talking about Snip Snip Hooray, vasectomy, right? So this is a service that we started to offer at the beginning of the year. In January, and it has really taken off. And so today's guests are going to be chatting with us about all things vasectomy, what the procedure's like, what the common misconceptions are out there, what recovery time is like. You know, why are people now interested in getting a vasectomy? More people anyway, as we're hearing more about this. So Dr. Chelsea Daniels, she's a physician with our organization at Planned Parenthood. She's going to be here today talking about how she has gotten down the science, right, of how to actually get this procedure going. We've been offering it since January, like I said, and she's gotten amazing at it. She's had so many patients come through and see her. And then we also have Jonathan, a recent patient of ours who took the plunge and said, yep, I'm going to get a vasectomy, and we'll hear about his experience as well. So I'll start off with Dr. Daniels. If you just want to give a little background about yourself, your reproductive healthcare experience, and how you got into vasectomies.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. This is so exciting, and it's so good to see Jonathan. So I was exposed to vasectomies in residency training, which is the part after medical school. And I always knew that I wanted to kind of dedicate my career to full scope family planning and reproductive health care. And that obviously includes vasectomies, because reproductive health care doesn't just affect women or people with uteruses. It affects every single one of us. So in order to be kind of that full scope doctor taking care of people with pregnancy-related decisions, I always knew I wanted to do vasectomies. So it's so cool to work at a place like Planned Parenthood that is encouraging that, and to have patients like Jonathan who are eager to have the procedure done.
Thank you. And Jonathan, tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you think, okay, like I'm interested in a vasectomy. I need to learn more about this and do this procedure.
And I've never particularly been for or against the idea of having children. But after a little over a year ago, we together went through a rather tragic experience where my fiance was pregnant, and at first there were some complications, and the doctors at the emergency room told us that they believed we were having a miscarriage. A few weeks after that, something still seemed off. And we then went down to Planned Parenthood, who then took another look, and turned out she was still pregnant, and there were still some complications going on and some health issues that made having a child at the time a terrifying idea. So we ended up having to go through with an abortion as well, and it was a very traumatic, very scary, and emotional experience in our life. Personally, for me, it was probably one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced, and that's saying a lot. But at that time, I had already considered the idea of getting a vasectomy because, let's face it, birth control options for women are, there's several options, but they all, most of the options out there, whether it's the pill, a shot, IUD, there's all of these different options that, change, the imbalances in their hormones and have such negative effects on women that it's not practical. Okay. Even so, it's so impractical actually that back, 5+ years ago, when doctors were trying to develop a male version of that kind of hormonal birth control, they stopped All right, they stopped that program. They stopped developing it because of the hormonal and mental and emotional side effects that men were reporting. The same kind of mental and emotional side effects that women have to deal with every single day in this country, right? But apparently men can't, you know, aren't strong enough to bear through it, right? Right. But apparently men can't, you know, aren't strong enough to bear through it, right? Uh, Unacceptable in my opinion. But anyways, I'd considered, getting a vasectomy prior to that, prior to any of this happening. Um, after going through that, after watching my fiance, the person I love most in this world, um, endure you know, that kind of grieving and that kind of pain and that kind of fear, um, I decided I never want them to ever have to go through something like that again. Right.
Wow.
Um, Fortunately, we were able to go through with the abortion at the time. However, it was at a point where the abortion pill was no longer an option, so it had to be a surgical abortion. Which, for anyone that has experienced it, I personally don't know how it feels. Right? I couldn't begin to imagine how it feels. But being the partner I am, I try to be supportive and I try to be there for my fiance as she's going through this, and I can see the pain, I can see the sorrow, and the fear, and just the trauma uh, of all of it, and you know going through that again. I decided I never want her to ever have to worry about going through something like this again. So I started seriously looking into getting a vasectomy. Right. Um, at that point, I did my research. I went ahead and had some of my sperm frozen, just in case at some point in the future we do decide that we want to have children. All right. I researched other options as well. Sperm aspiration, the procedure where they essentially they extract the sperm and tissue from the testicles to use in vitro fertilization. Right. Um, I looked up the statistics regarding vasectomy reversals just in case, that may be an option, but vasectomies are supposed to be considered permanent. It's a permanent form of birth control. Yes, vasectomy reversals are a thing. It is a procedure that doctors can do, but uh, from the statistics that I've seen, the success rate is listed as being anywhere from 60 to about 85%, depending on which source you check. Okay. Um, but then, of course, Florida, well, then there was the whole thing with Roe versus Wade being lifted, right? That is probably one of the most tragic judicial rulings in American history. Um, the fact that they went ahead and repealed that particular case. It's insane that we have these politicians, these people in power, who have absolutely no understanding, no regard for the female body. It's extremely upsetting.
Absolutely, Jonathan. And we're gonna get to that because that's one of the reasons why we have seen across the country such an interest in searches for vasectomy. And we're seeing younger men that are looking up vasectomy and wanting to investigate the procedure, try to get the procedure. But we'll get to that because that's so important and such an important part of this conversation. I do want to, for the listeners joining us, I want to explain first what is a vasectomy, just so like in simple terms, Dr. Daniels, what is a vasectomy, and what is the procedure that we offer at Planned Parenthood of Southeast and North Florida?
Yeah. So thanks so much, Jonathan. I actually learned a lot. I know you and I have talked a lot, but that was so great. So vasectomy is a very safe and quick procedure that's done in an office setting, just with local numbing medicine called lidocaine, like what you would get at the dentist, from each of the two testicles. there is a cord that carries the sperm. So sperm is made in the testicles and then it runs through these cords. And so what a vasectomy is the cutting of those tubes that are carrying the sperm. Those tubes, the medical word is called a vas deferens, which is where the term vasectomy comes from, because we're cutting the vas. And the way I usually explain it to patients is that you're still making sperm. All I've done is essentially put a roadblock so that the sperm can't get out anymore. And so for most procedures that we do, it takes under half an hour from setup to breakdown. I don't remember, Jonathan, how long yours took, but it's usually under a half an hour. So in and out, it's pretty quick.
It was about 20 minutes, actually just under 20 minutes.
Perfect. So it's in and out very, very quick. And there are virtually no side effects because we're not changing sperm production. We're not changing hormones. There are no changes to erections or to ejaculations. So from the patient's perspective and the perspective of the patient's partner, the phrase that is often used in the vasectomy community is actually that it's like having fruit without the seeds. So it's like everything is exactly the same, but just the seeds, or the sperm in this case, are just absent. So everything else is the same.
I love that. I love that description.
Yeah.
And so, Jonathan, you mentioned how quick the procedure was. What was the recovery like? Because that's another thing that we like to share with folks is it's not what you think. You're not going to be like laid out for like a whole week or 2 weeks trying to recover. Like, talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so the recovery honestly wasn't bad at all. I believe it was a Wednesday. I had work that Friday and I had no problems going back to work. No issues whatsoever. Some mild discomfort at most, but not really any pain. Although I highly recommend anyone out there who is considering getting a vasectomy, you can find boxers that have on the inside a little pouch for extra support. Get those. Okay, they are amazing. Probably the most comfortable pair of boxers I've ever worn. But as far as the recovery time goes, I drove myself to the doctor's office for the procedure. I drove myself home right after the procedure. There were no issues, no complications. By the next day, at the very most, there was some mild discomfort that I was able to treat with just some ibuprofen, and had no issues whatsoever.
And Dr. Daniels, I know that from what we hear all the time when we're searching on Google and trying to see what other people are asking about vasectomy, what are people's questions? One thing that I come across a lot is, well, this is gonna change my performance in the bedroom. I feel like I'm not gonna be able to live up to that. What is your answer to that, Dr. Daniels? How do you express to patients that there really is no change besides how you felt before, what you did before?
Yeah. And I get asked that question a lot. We at Planned Parenthood break the vasectomy up into 2 visits. So the first visit is just for you to come in and meet me. And just, I answer all your questions. I kind of talk through my basic preoperative spiel and I do an exam. So you and I, the patient and I, have a chance to get to know each other. And then you come back for a second visit for your actual procedure. So in that first visit, I get that question a lot. Are my erections going to be the same? Am I still going to ejaculate normally? The answer is yes to both of those things. There is no difference from the patient's perspective because about 98% of what you ejaculate is all of the supportive fluid for the sperm. That's the semen itself. And that's coming from the glands, like the prostate gland. Only about 2% is the actual sperm. So we're preventing that sperm from getting out. You don't notice that 2%. No one would notice that 2%. And then similarly, as far as erections go, the point of a vasectomy is just to create an interruption in the traveling of sperm. So I'm not affecting the blood vessels that cause erections. I'm not affecting the nerves that affect sensation. This is a procedure really just for those vas deferens tubes.
This is like get it and forget it birth control, basically.
Exactly. And the other nice thing too is, and Jonathan can attest to this, the modern vasectomy is what we call a no needle, no scalpel vasectomy. So we're not using anything sharp. We're not doing big gashes to find those tubes. We make a little window on the top of the scrotum that's 3 millimeters and bring both of the sperm tubes up through that window. So there's no stitches, there's no bleeding. It really is as simple of a procedure as there is.
Wow. And Jonathan, any changes? I know you said all you had was mild discomfort the next day or right after.
Yeah, no, like I said, no real pain or anything. Just like I said, mild discomfort. Regarding what you were just saying, though, yeah, no, absolutely no changes whatsoever as far as sex drive, as far as performance in the bedroom.
I'm sure that's a relief. Your fiance is like, woohoo!
We're doing a live crowd
they're
surf with his
reading right
fiance.
I love it. And going back to, the really, personal and just like touching stuff that you shared at the beginning of this podcast. You talked about like watching what your fiance had gone through with this unexpected pregnancy and just kind of, going through a miscarriage that was very dragged on and delayed because, right, everybody thinks, oh, when you have a miscarriage, everything just happens naturally and it gets emptied out and you're good. That's not the case for every single person that gets pregnant and goes through this. Judging now that you have been through that and you went through the vasectomy, talk a little bit about the difference. Like, you obviously don't regret this decision, that like you do this over and over again if you had to, just to avoid her ever going through something like that, like comparing, the experiences.
Absolutely. Like I said, if there's anything that I can do to make sure that my fiance, the person that I love, doesn't have to endure that kind of, that kind of grieving, that kind of pain, I'll do it. And as far as I can tell, this has been an amazing decision, especially with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and especially with the more recent Florida 6-week abortion ban. It's a relief. It's a weight off of the shoulders, a weight off my chest, really, to know that we're not, once everything's said and done, we're not going to have to worry about those things.
Yeah, and a lot of males are considering that across the country, given after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, with the abortion restrictions that have been passed across the country. In Florida, like you said, we have a near total abortion ban, right? Like, once a woman finds out she's pregnant, she's already she's missed a period. She's already 4 weeks pregnant, which people don't get that. They think 6 weeks means you've been pregnant for 6 weeks and you've known for 6 weeks. No, that's not the case.
Most women don't even realize that they're pregnant until about 8 weeks in. Realistically.
Yeah, much later. 100%. And our physicians can attest to that too, because they have patients who come to them just finding out they're pregnant, and it's usually around 8 to 10 weeks that they're finding out. So going back to that interest, we are seeing trends of younger men, and these are males that either have already had children and they have their families. They're not interested in having any more kids and have decided to move forward with a vasectomy to take that burden off of their partner for birth control. And then there's others that don't want children, or there are others that I don't want children. And like you researched and you're like, well, there's a way for me to be able to freeze my sperm to still have options in the future. And I think that's what people don't understand, that there's always, options out there. I know that IVF is expensive, but for a lot of families, it's a possibility for you to be able to do these things and still have options.
Just to comment on that, right? IVF, yes, it is expensive. Okay. Vasectomy reversal is also expensive. Sperm aspiration, also an expensive option, which goes hand in hand with IVF. But here's the thing: we live in a society today where just to give birth to a child, right? Just the act of birthing a child costs what, $50,000, something along those lines.
Yeah, for some hospitals, depending on where you labor, if you have insurance, if you don't have insurance, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. So think about it this way, right? If your only options to have a child are expensive, right? That requires you to be in a financial position to be able to care for a child, right? At least that way we don't have, at least that way we don't have people having accidental pregnancies, or as Bob Ross might say, a happy little surprise, right? At least we don't have people having these happy little surprises and being in a financial situation that could potentially be devastating for a child to have to grow up through.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's also about choice, I think, right? Like everyone should have the ability to choose whether or not they want to have a birth control method that works for them, and aside from vasectomy, obviously most of the options, like you mentioned, are for women. So it's so nice that there is an option for men, because what I with the vasectomies I do, oftentimes what I'm hearing from patients is, my partner has a birth control, it's just not working for her anymore, and we're really looking for something else. So I think having this additional choice for couples is so awesome.
Yeah. And also acknowledging that for a female, tubal litigation is much more invasive. It's a surgery, it costs, I'm sure, way more than a vasectomy costs. So it's just.
Besides that, with tubal litigation, whether it's having tubes tied, having a hysterectomy, or any of that, most doctors that do those procedures won't touch a woman unless she's 35 years old, has 2 kids already, and is married with a husband who signs off on these things. Right? Women in this country don't have the bodily autonomy to make that decision for themselves. They go into a doctor's office and say, hey, I want to have my tubes tied, or I want a hysterectomy. Even if it's a matter of health, even if it's in the case of, let's say, endometriosis, right, or something akin to that, right, which doesn't have a cure, can only be cured through the removal of the uterus, right? The doctor will still sit there and ask questions like, are you sure? What if you change your mind? What if you decide you want to have children later on? All of these things. They perpetrate this ideal as if a woman has no value in society unless she is rearing a child or bringing a child into this world, which is, along the lines of many other things, absolutely absurd.
Absolutely. And that's a reality that nobody talks about. And it's so true. I've heard that so many times, where physicians won't even consider tubal litigation unless you're over a certain age. It's going back to that, idea in our country, right, that has been forced on us, that if you have a uterus, you don't know how to make decisions for yourself. So everybody else has to make them for you. Let's go back real quick to the interest, the peak interest in vasectomy, given the abortion restrictions across the country. I think what we're seeing, and in your case specifically, Jonathan, you can talk about this more. What is the fear, in that, your partner might get pregnant accidentally, unplanned pregnancy, or even a wanted pregnancy. There's some people that we're seeing in wanted pregnancies that are suffering horrible complications because of abortion restrictions. And this is really starting to make, males that are in these heterosexual relationships, or in a relationship with someone with a uterus, where they start to think through this, and they're like, well, I can take this burden off my partner. I can get a vasectomy, and we don't have to worry about this. We don't have to go through, these, ideas of what kind of birth control works for you. Does birth control work for you? How long are we going to be on birth control? All of those questions.
So on that note, it's one of those things where, like you said, it's something that I can do. It's not the most expensive thing in the world. I think the grand total was, just over $800 for everything to get done, right? Which,
and most insurance covers vasectomies, yeah.
Which
an IUD is like
insurance.
over $1,000 just to get an IUD.
That's without insurance. Okay. With insurance, I don't know. Some insurance companies may even cover the entire cost of it.
A lot of them do. Like a lot of the patients who come in with an insurance plan, their out-of-pocket expense is $0.
Wow.
Now, the issue, right? The issue is, like you said, and it's a matter of figuring out what kind of birth control works for you. And, for women, that again, there are several options. There's the pill, which is a hormonal birth control, which causes all sorts of, in some cases, devastating side effects. There's the shots, which again, hormonal, and causes those side effects. There's IUDs, which I'm pretty sure is also, again, hormonal and causes side effects. You know,
There are some non-hormonal options, but you still have to go through the costs, the insertion, you know, the time span of how long you can have that IUD. Some women experience, you know, some pain or discomfort with IUDs in the beginning. It just depends. Everybody's different.
I mean, I actually know someone who had an IUD, and you know, that time frame that it's supposed to be in there had already passed, but she couldn't afford to get it removed. Okay, what happens then? What do we do then when you have this thing stuck inside your body that you need removed, you know, past a certain point, that you can't afford to do that? You know, you
For all the
can't afford
listeners
to
out there, we do IUD removals as well at Planned Parenthood, affordable IUD removals. So just so people know.
Awesome. You know, but that's
it's a reality.
You know, it's one of those things. It's a tragic reality that we're faced with, where, you know, again, while women do have various different options, almost all of them have some, in many cases, severe negative side effects, right? One thing I do believe that we as a society, you know, that science and medicine really needs to work on is developing more options for birth control for men, right? Because as it stands right now, men have three options, right? There's wearing a condom, which, okay, condoms work most of the time, but they do break. You know, in some cases, you've got those tiny little microorganisms that are your sperm cells that still slip through, right? They're not 100% effective. You know, you've got vasectomies, which is the other primary option that men have, which is a permanent form of birth control, which, again, you can take the precautions of having your sperm stored, you know, frozen, stored. You can do your research in terms of sperm aspiration, you know, things of that nature, and cover your bases. Yes, but again, vasectomies are supposed to be seen as a permanent form of birth control.
Yeah.
Right. So
and that's important to bring up, because I do appreciate that you highlight that, and we don't want anyone to, you know, make the decision to have a vasectomy and then decide this wasn't the right birth control for me. Like, you have to be 100% sure this is what you want.
Exactly. You know, you definitely want to cover all of your bases, right? When making that decision. You know, if you think that at some point you could change your mind, have a few samples of your sperm stored, you know, frozen and stored away. It's really not that expensive. I believe I pay $100 per year for my sperm to be stored, right? Which realistically, $100 over the course of an entire year, that's what, $8 a month?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Incredible.
All right. And then men's third option for birth control is abstinence, which, you know, that's an option, but let's be realistic.
Yeah, not realistic. Yeah.
That's not a realistic expectation for really anyone in society in modern times. That's kind of just the world we live in, which there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we are, you know, humans are naturally pleasure seeking, you know, so we're going to seek out pleasure in whatever form we can find it. Sex being one of the primary forms of pleasure that we tend to seek, right? We don't have any kind of pill that we can take. I know that some countries are working on developing something that's kind of akin to an IUD for men. It's a substance that they actually inject into the vas deferens that blocks it, that, you know, later on down the line, if you decide that you do want to have kids, they just inject a solution that dissolves that substance and clears the way, and you're good to go.
It's
right?
like a gel that you inject on both sides. Yeah.
That's interesting.
The thing is, that hasn't been approved for mass use. You know, they're still doing research in it.
Isn't it
The,
wild how many, decades we've had some form of birth control, like since the pill was established, and nothing has come out for men besides a vasectomy? Like,
well,
there's so many different forms of birth control for women, right? And like you said, Jonathan, there's varying like side effects, different
mhm.
reasons why one might work for you, not the other. But there's very limited options for men.
Yes, and that's because when they did try to develop similar types of birth control, similar forms of birth control for men, men complained so much about the side effects that they were experiencing, which were essentially the same side effects that women deal with every single day, right, and have been dealing with for decades, right? Um, Men were experiencing these same side effects, and it was deemed. Um, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was essentially too severe of a side effect for it to be deemed appropriate for general use.
I'm sure ever since you got this procedure, Jonathan, you talked a lot about how you feel so much better that you're not going to put your partner in a position like what she's gone through before. But for you, like, do you feel, less stressed? Like, are you feel relieved? Like, has sex even been more pleasurable now because you don't have to worry about this? What is it like for you?
So I can't speak on that quite yet. After getting the procedure, you're supposed to wait. It's 12 weeks and 20 ejaculations later
He's an
before.
expert. I've coached him
Wow.
well. I was gonna say,
He listens and does research.
very good.
I like to know what I'm talking about, right? But you got to wait 12 weeks, at least 20 ejaculations later, and then ideally, you would send in a sample to be tested just to make sure that you're good to go,
Yeah.
right?
And that's
Um,
actually something at Planned Parenthood that we set patients up with, and Jonathan will be
like
using
that
this.
that's
It's
included in the cost of the vasectomy,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's
So,
a kit that is extremely
yeah,
self-explanatory for patients to use at that 3-month mark to send off a
which,
sample of their.
which realistically, the a kit like that with most, like, for example, the company that I went with for storing some of my sperm, right? Um, they offer those types of services as well to test it and all of that. A kit like the one that I was provided with included within the cost of my vasectomy. Um, the value of it is roughly about $300-400, right? Um, that's across the board with most of the companies that do sperm banking. Kind of freezing and storing your sperm. They'll offer you that service to have you send out a sample for them to test it and check your sperm count and check the normalcy, more or less, of your sperm quality. Uh, and that service costs about $300 to $400 easily.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Yeah, it's extremely affordable to do it through Planned Parenthood for sure,
oh yeah,
with that included. And so just to wrap up here, this was it seems like it was a relatively, simple, procedure, easy
oh yeah.
access to be able to do this. We offer it at our Southern Health Centers, in Kendall and in the Golden Glades Health Center in Miami. We also have an option for Jacksonville, if patients out there want to be able to get a vasectomy. I encourage people to look us up on ppsenfl.org. We have a whole page on vasectomy and our services there where you can read about the no scalpel method. You can read about the recovery time. Those underwear options that Jonathan was talking about, the snug huggers, we sell those as well at our health centers now. So definitely something to ask about. Yeah, they're the snug underwear options after a vasectomy. So we just encourage people to look it up, look into it.
I always hit home for people is that it is safe, quick, and effective. And I think highlighting the safety is also really important. This is so safe. The risks are so rare. We've never had an adverse event. So It works. It's safe. It's relatively painless. You're going to be in and out in 30 minutes. It doesn't get more streamlined.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing. Jonathan, I appreciate you sharing your perspective and your experience. Learn more about us. Yeah, learn more about us. Learn about our vasectomy services if that's what you're interested. If not, we do offer, birth control options, all kinds of options. We offer the full spectrum of reproductive health care. So check us out, ppscnfl.org. You can also check us out on our social media channels at ppscnfl. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us for our last episode of the season. And we hope to bring you some more exciting content at the end of the summer. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.